Joe Scarborough is with us. Joe Scarborough, the host of Morning Joe on MSNBC, former Republican congressman from Florida. His previous book, Rome Wasn't Burnt in a Day, has a new book out, The Last Best Hope, Restoring Conservatism and America's Promise. Joe Scarborough, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Tom.
Great to have you with us. I'm curious, your book, you're taking your own party, the Republican Party, to task, and I think, you know, if you're promoting conservatism, that makes a lot of sense given how the party's been going the last decade,
right.
Or arguably the last 3 decades. And you also speak well of the United Nations. Give us a riff on this, would you?
Well, first of all, on my last book, 5 years ago, I wrote Rome Wasn't Burnt in a Day, and I wrote it in 2004 when George Bush was running for re-election, and it was released, and I predicted that over the coming years, the Republican Party would, if they continued to spend as recklessly as they'd been doing over Bush's first 4 years, that they would eventually lose their majority in Congress and that'd wreck the economy. And it didn't make a lot of Republicans happy, but it was the truth. And in this book, I basically continue and say that now the Republican Party's at the point where they're going to have to reform or die. You know, after Bush got taken out of office and McCain got beaten and Republicans got just absolutely rejected at the polls, a lot of people in the media that I work with said, well, you know, it's because the Republicans became too conservative. This book explains that we didn't lose because we became too conservative. We lost because we became too radical. I don't know what's conservative about, you know, taking a $155 billion surplus that George Bush had in 2001 and turning it into a $1.5 trillion deficit.
Right.
Engaging in military adventurism, which was the exact opposite of what we said we should do in the 1990s, and you know, the harsh rhetoric also. Nothing conservative.
I'm not sure there's anything necessarily liberal about those things either. I mean, these might be areas where there's some convergence. Do you consider Dwight Eisenhower conservative?
Would I consider Eisenhower conservative? Yeah. I mean, that's my definition of conservative.
But see, Dwight Eisenhower thought that a 94% top income tax rate on people making over $3.2 million a year was good for America. Yeah. I'm assuming you've read his correspondences with his brother David on this.
No, I haven't read about it, 94%. But I will tell you what I did like about Eisenhower, which I put into my environmental chapter, because I also argue there's nothing conservative about 4% of the world's population consuming 25% of our energy resources. I pointed to what Ike decided to do, and I think it was 57, 58 after Sputnik. And he actually encouraged the federal government to get involved in investment in science and in math,
yep,
and did a lot of incredible things. And that's what Republicans need to stop fighting the inevitable. We've got to get the federal government involved in the greening of our economy, and not just because of the environment, but because it makes sense economically.
No, I absolutely agree with you, and the whole idea of investment. I was one of the big beneficiaries of that. In 1957, when Sputnik went up, I was in the 2nd grade, and Eisenhower threw all this money into let's find the next generation of scientists. And I was one of 2 kids in our school that was identified as a gifted kid and pulled out and put in the special program. Yeah. The federal government actually funded a program for gifted kids. By the time I was 12 years old, I'd basically completed high school, and that program all vanished with Vietnam. I mean, it's no longer there at all. We're not investing in our kids anymore. We're not investing in our country. And that is traditionally a liberal concept. At least I think most people think of it as such, rather than a conservative concept. How are you, reconciling those things?
Well, first of all, let's go back and talk about what Eisenhower did with that program also. He created what, as you know, personally created what this program created what became new math. It also created technology that became the basis eventually of the Internet. Yep. And that's wise investment. You're engaging in a false economy if you say right now in 2009 that we cannot afford to retool our economy to be a green economy. I've got no problem with investment. It's just like everybody's talking about healthcare. Oh, we've got to the president wants to nationalize health care. That's what the argument is. I don't mind spending money on health care if the president can figure out a way to get 47 million Americans health care insurance. But the bigger problem right now facing this country is the fact that healthcare costs are exploding at such a rapid rate that Medicare and Medicaid go bankrupt in about a decade.
Sure.
Our healthcare costs cripple us. I will spend the money. I will write the check. I will pay my taxes to reform healthcare, but let's not do it the way we've done it in the past, where we write checks without taking the tough steps.
I agree, but a lot of that problem, Joe, we're talking with Joe Scarborough, his new book, The Last Best Hope, Restoring Conservatism in America's Promise. A lot of that problem is from Billy Townsend and from your party, the Republican Party, Medicare Part D. You can't negotiate drug prices.
Well, and let me tell you, let's talk about drug prices for a second. What happened over the past 8 years is that you had George W. Bush. He understood Medicare was in trouble, despite the fact that he and Republicans and Democrats knew that Medicare was going to be facing bankruptcy in the future. They added on a $7 trillion liability with a Medicare drug plan that, let's face it, just put us further behind the 8 ball. Again, if the president had said, "Listen, this is what we're going to do. We are going to add a $7 trillion liability to Medicare, but this is how we keep it solvent for another 20 years. We're going to make tough decisions. We're going to make tough choices, not based on what's best for the AARP or for the pharmaceutical companies, but just let's break it down to basic math. This is how we make sure it doesn't go bankrupt in 2015 or 2016.
Joe, you're talking stuff that's going to require campaign finance reform to happen.
But I don't know if campaign finance reform is the answer. I know that Republicans and Democrats alike have been irresponsible for too long. But if Barack Obama would win a tip of my hat if, when he talked about Medicare reform, he did so by saying, we're going to insure all 47 million Americans, but for the rest of us, the 300 million, we're going to have to make some tough choices. We're not going to be able to get all the CAT scans we want to get. We're not going to be able to afford all the things we've been able to afford. We're going to have to make tough choices because our health care costs are going to bankrupt this country.
Well, and they already are, and they're making our businesses uncompetitive because we have a business-based healthcare system, and no other industrialized country in the world does.
And by the way, I want to, because you may have some listeners here that are progressive.
And we've got 30 seconds, Joe.
And they're thinking, hey, Joe Scarborough, man, now I'm a conservative. I mean, I'm really more of a libertarian than a conservative, but these things that we're talking about right here are things that all of us should agree with. Take it out of ideology. Talk about retooling our economy to make it more of a green economy. Same thing with healthcare costs. It comes down to math.
Yeah, and perhaps our trade policy as well.
Right.
We have no industrial policy in the United States. Alexander Hamilton put it into place in 1791, and it's disintegrated over the last 30 years.
No doubt.
Joe Scarborough, his new book, The Last Best Hope, Restoring Conservatism and America's Promise, joescarborough.com, the website. Joe, thanks for dropping by.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good luck with your book.
All right, thank you.
16 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann radio program. We will be right back with your calls and more on how this economy is going down the tubes right after this.